Lock down the engines. Captain Ivar Nix's voice cut through the low murmur of the Nemesis's command deck. The vessel's cockpit, dimly lit by flickering laser plasma displays, pulsed with the quiet intensity of a predator waiting to strike. The Empire's massive fleet lay just beyond the star cluster, oblivious to the threat that stalked them, camouflaged in the void. He stood tall, hands gripping the worn edge of the tactical console, eyes scanning the series of shifting coordinates projected on the screen. His crew moved silently around him, each member absorbed in their tasks. The sleek contours of the Nemesis blended perfectly with the surrounding darkness of space, its black hull nearly indistinguishable from the endless void outside. Every inch of the warship was designed to be a ghost, a presence unnoticed until it was too late. "Course correction complete, sir," Lieutenant Jarek Thorne reported from the navigation station, his voice steady, almost detached. Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly as he adjusted the ship's trajectory with a soft tap of his fingers, his focus entirely on the mission ahead. The young officer, once eager to climb the ranks of the Empire's fleet, had found a new purpose under Ivar's command. His loyalty, now unshakable, was no longer to an empire that had failed him, but to the cause of rebellion and freedom. Ivar nodded, without looking at him. He could feel the weight of the quiet, the kind of silence that preceded destruction. "All systems are online," said Reese Maverick, the ship's chief engineer, his voice gravelly but controlled. "We're good to go." "Then let's make them notice us." The captain's words sliced through the tension like a blade. There was no hint of bravado in his tone, just cold certainty. Ivar Nix, former Imperial officer, now the captain of the Nemesis, had seen the Empire's arrogance firsthand. He knew the magnitude of their military might, knew the thousands of ships, the advanced weaponry, the unshakable belief in their superiority, and he knew exactly how to exploit it. Through a small speaker embedded in the ceiling, the faint voice of Lieutenant Alden Drace crackled in. "The target's in range, sir. You'll have them in the crosshairs in 3 minutes." "Good. We'll be gone before they know we're here," Ivar said, voice calm, but with a hard edge to it. He adjusted his posture, the leather of his uniform creaking slightly. The sharp scent of burnt ozone filled the room, a stark contrast to the controlled stillness of space beyond. The air in the control room was stale, recycled, heavy with the electric tang of technology that hummed under the surface of every conversation. The plan was simple, fast, efficient, and ruthless. The Empire's grasp on its territories had become too strong, too suffocating. The Nemesis would strike where it would hurt the most, the Empire's communication lines. It wasn't just an attack, it was a message. Ivar didn't need a fleet to break them. He only needed one ship, one brilliant crew, and a strategy they couldn't even begin to understand. "Approaching the first relay," said Cale Grayson, the tactical officer, his voice low and sharp. His fingers flew across the heads-up display, tracking the incoming satellites with an expertise honed by years of service in the Imperial Navy. Grayson had once been the Empire's pride, a veteran of countless operations, but the Nemesis had become his redemption. "Deploy the hack," Ivar ordered. Kyle's hands paused momentarily before responding, his voice a steady command. "Hack deployed, Captain." "The relay will be down in seconds." Ivar allowed himself a brief moment to think, though his thoughts remained focused. The Empire's reliance on communication satellites across its territories was its greatest weakness. They thought they controlled everything, every message, every command. They had no idea that a single ship cloaked in shadow could unravel it all. Suddenly, an alarm rang out across the deck, cutting through the otherwise eerie calm. "We've got incoming," said Dax Rylos, the ship's tech specialist, his voice tinged with the kind of alertness that could only come from years of dealing with high-risk operations. "Their sensors are picking up the breach. It won't be long before they notice." The room seemed to shrink in an instant, the light from the laser displays harsh and unforgiving as every eye turned toward the screens. Ivar felt his pulse quicken, though he kept his face an unreadable mask. The Empire had underestimated them once again. "They'll know we're here," Ivar said, his voice cold, a promise in the words. "But by the time they realize what's happening, we'll already be gone." The ship lurched as Kyle's deft hands continued to manipulate the controls, sending ripples of tension through the ship. Ivar could sense the tension rising among his crew, but none of them faltered. Each of them had been part of the Imperial machine at one point, but now they were the rebels, the ghosts that hunted the Empire in the dark. "Relays down," Kyle reported, his voice steady, though there was a slight edge to it. "They're scrambling. It'll be chaos soon." "Good," Ivar said, his lips curling into a faint smile. He turned his gaze toward the view screen, which now displayed a real-time feed of the surrounding area. The distant outline of the Imperial fleet loomed on the horizon, oblivious to the shadow creeping into their ranks. "Time to disappear," Ivar muttered under his breath. "Reese, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Jarek, keep us on course." The crew worked in tandem, their movements sharp, practiced. Reese activated the cloaking device, the ship's sensors blinking as they faded from sight. They had one chance, one fleeting moment, where the Nemesis could slip through the Empire's defenses, unnoticed, invisible, like a knife in the dark. "Shifting course, Captain," Jarek said, his fingers working rapidly on the navigation console. "They'll be searching for us now. The real challenge begins." Ivar exhaled slowly, the tightness in his chest easing slightly. This was what he had trained for, what he had fought for. To take on the Empire with nothing more than a ship and a crew, to strike where they least expected it, to leave them fumbling in confusion, their power crumbling before their eyes. The ship drifted silently through the void, the Nemesis now a shadow among shadows, unseen, unnoticed. For the first time in years, Ivar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had done it. The Empire had no idea what was coming next. "Next target," Ivar commanded, his voice unwavering. "Let's make sure they understand just who's been hunting them all this time." The ship's engines hummed softly beneath the steady rhythm of the crew's movements, the only sound in the dark. As they moved deeper into the Empire's territory, Captain Ivar knew the battle was far from over. But today, the first strike had been made, and the Empire, for the first time in centuries, had learned that the impossible was not only possible, it had already begun. The Nemesis glided through the darkness, its black hull barely detectable against the starless backdrop of space. The soft hum of the ship's advanced stealth systems whispered like a ghost through the vacuum, untraceable by the Empire's sensors. Yet despite the quiet, a heavy weight pressed down on Captain Ivar Nix. His mind churned over the plan ahead. Today, the Nemesis would strike again. "Approaching target," Lieutenant Jarek Thorne announced from the navigation console, his voice steady but his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he adjusted their course. Ivar stood in the dim light of the command deck, staring at the rotating laser plasma displays. They showed the complex web of Imperial supply lines, scattered across the galaxy like a spider's intricate web. The Empire had placed their lifeblood in these systems, resources, communications, reinforcements, everything, and they had no idea that a single ship was picking apart their fragile infrastructure, cutting through their network. "Now," Cale Grayson's voice followed, his eyes fixed on the heads-up display, watching the rebel fleet's movements unravel in real time. "The relay station will be down in less than 5 minutes." "Good." Ivar's reply was simple, his gaze unwavering. "No mistakes, Kyle." They were nearing the heart of their next target, a communications relay buried deep in the territory of one of the Empire's lesser-known sector commanders. The relay was a vital piece in their stranglehold on several key sectors. Disrupting it would send ripples of confusion through the Empire, delaying reinforcements and sowing chaos among their commanders. Dax Rylos, their tech specialist, moved closer to his console, his fingers working with a precision that matched the urgency of their mission. "Hack is in place, Captain. A few more seconds, and we'll have them completely shut down." Ivar's eyes flicked from Dax's display to the outside view. He could almost see it, the quiet panic that would soon erupt across the Empire's forces. His chest tightened. Every strike had consequences, but they had to keep pushing. The Empire's chokehold on the galaxy needed to end. "Stay alert, people," Ivar commanded, his voice quieter now, tinged with something deeper, an intensity that felt almost like a whisper of an impending storm. "The Empire will know we were here soon enough, We'll be long gone by then, but don't let them corner us." For a moment, the crew fell into a focused silence, each of them moving with practiced ease. The weight of their mission hung over them, not just the tactical elements, but the truth of what they were doing. With each success, they were bringing the galaxy one step closer to freedom, but with each success, they were also drawing closer to being discovered. Ivar watched as the Nemesis slid into position, cutting through the outer defenses with ruthless efficiency. The crew had trained for this moment 1,000 times. They knew their roles, and they executed each step with the precision of a hunter stalking its prey. The Nemesis's exterior shimmered faintly as it adjusted its cloaking mechanisms, slipping beneath the radar as it approached the communications relay. Every sense on board was heightened. The subtle vibrations underfoot, the sharp tang of ionized air, and the occasional click of a switch in the background, each small detail kept them tethered to the task at hand. The heads-up display blinked to life as Dax confirmed the relay systems were now fully compromised. "They're offline," he said. "Good to go. Let's disappear." Ivar's voice rang with quiet authority as he motioned toward Jarek to make the course correction. He turned to Kale, whose face remained unreadable, his fingers still flying across the console as he manipulated the data streams. "Next target is ready. Same plan. Disrupt, withdraw, leave them blind." The crew followed his instructions without question. The Nemesis moved swiftly into the next phase of its mission, slipping past the beleaguered Imperial forces, leaving nothing behind but confusion and silence. But something wasn't right. The tension had shifted, creeping into the corners of Ivar's mind. He could feel it in his gut. Something was different this time. His eyes flicked to the laser plasma displays, watching for any signs of Imperial response. "Captain," Kale's voice broke the silence. "They've detected the disruption. I'm seeing a change in their patrols. They're pulling in more ships. The Empire's getting nervous." Ivar's heart skipped a beat. "How long until we're in their sights?" "Less than 20 minutes, Jarek said, his brow furrowing as his fingers danced over the navigation console. "Get us out of here!" Ivar snapped, his voice a low growl. His mind raced. "We don't stick around for a fight we don't need." But as the Nemesis turned to retreat, a shrill alarm echoed through the ship, followed by a ripple of tension from the crew. The ship shuddered as the faint trace of an Imperial destroyer appeared on their scanners. "Someone's getting smarter," Ivar muttered, eyes narrowing. "Increase speed. Let's lose them." Dax's fingers moved with a frenetic pace, sending signals back to the ship's stealth systems. But the Nemesis had already been compromised. The Empire was onto them. Ivar's jaw clenched. The sudden intensity in the air was palpable. They were no longer just hunting shadows. They were the hunted. "Take the shortest route through the nebula," Ivar ordered, leaning forward. "We'll hide in the storm and use the electromagnetic currents to cover our tracks." Jarek's hand hesitated over the console. "It's dangerous, Captain. The nebula's unstable. We don't have time for hesitation." Ivar cut him off, his eyes meeting Jarek's. "Trust me. We've done worse." The crew followed his lead, the Nemesis darting toward the swirling chaos of the nebula. The ship trembled as they neared the storm, a violent swirl of charged particles and magnetic forces. "Prepare for turbulence," Reese Maverick called out from engineering. "This won't be a smooth ride." The ship lurched as the nebula's energy field assaulted their systems, rattling the crew. The once silent air was filled with the electric hiss of overloading systems, the stinging smell of ozone cutting through the cabin. The interior lights flickered as the ship fought against the cosmic chaos surrounding them. "Steady, everyone," Ivar said, his voice steady despite the rocking of the ship. "We're not out of this yet." The ship's heads-up display flashed warnings as they maneuvered through the dense cloud of particles. Outside, the stars seemed to disappear, swallowed whole by the violent force of the nebula. Inside, the crew remained resolute, each breath shallow as they fought to maintain control. "We're through the worst of it," Jarek reported, his voice strained but filled with determination. "Give us a few more minutes and we'll lose them." Ivar glanced at the readouts, his fingers twitching with tension. "Keep your eyes open. They'll be tracking us, and we won't have long before they figure it out." As the Nemesis continued its flight through the nebula, Ivar couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer just running from the Empire. They were being drawn into something much bigger. The storm outside mirrored the growing chaos in his mind. Would they make it out alive, or had they finally pushed too far into the shadows? The answer would come soon enough. For now, all they could do was keep moving. The nebula's violent embrace finally loosened, and the nemesis emerged into open space, a shadow flickering through the darkness. Captain Ivar Nix stood at the edge of the command deck, watching the crew work with unshaken concentration. They had just survived their narrowest escape, but the rush of adrenaline was already wearing off, replaced by the quiet hum of anticipation. They weren't safe, not yet. "Closing in on the next target," Jarek Thorne's voice cut through the silence, his fingers moving swiftly over the navigation console. "We've lost the destroyer's signal, but they'll be back before long." Ivar's eyes flicked toward the heads-up display, where a small red dot blinked on a map of Imperial holdings. Another relay station. Another weakness in the Empire's armor. He let out a slow breath, grounding himself. The nemesis was far from invincible. They couldn't afford another slip-up. "Good," Ivar muttered, stepping away from the edge of the deck and pacing toward the console. "Set us on course. This time we don't just disable, we cripple." Cale Grayson, the ship's tactical officer, didn't look up from his console but spoke, his voice low and filled with quiet intensity. "I've been tracking their communications, Captain. The Empire's scrambling, calling in reinforcements. They'll be on to us soon. We need to act fast." Ivar stopped behind him, eyes fixed on the shifting data. "Let them scramble. Let them chase shadows. It's all part of the plan." He leaned closer to the screen, watching the Imperial fleet's movements dance across the laser plasma displays. "We won't be their prey. Not today." The ship shuddered slightly as it changed course, the faint vibrations reverberating through the deck beneath them. Reese Maverick, the chief engineer, looked up from his station, his face drawn with concentration. "We're running low on power, Captain. The stealth systems are draining more than expected. We can't keep this up indefinitely." Ivar's gaze snapped to the engineer, his expression hardening. "We'll make it last. This is our one shot. We've planned too long, bled too much for it to fall apart now." Reese nodded silently, turning back to the flickering controls in front of him, his mind already shifting toward the adjustments needed to stretch their remaining resources. In the silence that followed, Dax Rylos, the tech specialist, cracked his knuckles before speaking in his usual calm tone. "They're still blind, but I've intercepted a few Imperial messages. They're getting close to a breakthrough. If we don't hit them soon, they'll triangulate our position." Ivar's eyes darkened as he turned toward Dax, leaning in. "How close?" "Minutes, maybe less." Dax's fingers hovered over the keyboard, eyes flickering rapidly between the incoming data streams. "The scramble's almost over. If we move quickly, they won't be able to lock onto us." Ivar's jaw clenched. The Empire was relentless, yes, but they were also predictable. And in their haste, they were starting to underestimate the one thing that could tear them apart, their own arrogance. "Get us to the relay. If we can disrupt their command center for long enough, we'll make them believe we're everywhere." The crew responded to the order without a word. They were used to these moments, when time wasn't a luxury, and every action they took had to matter. Each second that passed was another they could be discovered. Ivar could feel it in his bones, a cold knot that tightened with every minute they spent inside Imperial territory. There was no room for mistakes. As they approached the relay, the ship's systems hummed with tension, the air on the deck thickening. Cale's fingers flew over the controls, adjusting their trajectory to the precise angle needed to avoid detection. Ivar stood silently, observing the crew. His eyes flicked to Reese, whose fingers hovered over the power grid display, and to Jarek, whose expression remained unreadable as the coordinates shifted on his console. "Ready, Captain," Cale said, his voice cool but edged with urgency. "We're in position, locking onto their communications." Dax's fingers flew across his console. "I've breached their outer defenses. 1 minute until full access." Ivar straightened, his eyes locking onto the flashing green dot on the display. signaling the relay's vulnerability. The ship was now positioned directly within the Empire's communication blind spot. They had moments, seconds maybe, to strike before the Empire realized what was happening. The tension in the air thickened, the subtle shift in the ship's vibrations growing heavier with every passing second. The smell of burnt ozone filled Ivar's nostrils, a reminder of the danger they were in, but it didn't faze him. He was focused, determined, grounded. This moment, this strike, it could change everything. "Now," Ivar said simply. Dax's hands danced over his console, and the relay's systems flickered before going dark. The ship's energy systems surged in response, feeding the cloaking technology one last burst of power. "Relay's down," Dax confirmed. "They'll know soon, but we're already gone." "Not yet," Ivar replied. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're not finished." Kyle's voice broke through the tension. "Captain, we've got company." The plasma display flickered with new data, revealing the unmistakable outline of an Imperial ship closing in on their position. The fleet had detected the disruption. They were coming for them. "Evasive now!" Ivar barked. "Reese, get us out of here!" The Nemesis jolted, its inertial dampeners pushing back as the ship began to accelerate toward the far side of the system. But the Imperial vessel was closing in fast. Ivar's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them. Not this time. He leaned forward, eyes scanning the display. The Empire was relentless, and their vast fleet made it hard to slip past undetected. But the Nemesis had something they didn't, a tactical advantage. Ivar turned to Kale. "Let's give them a reason to hesitate." A grin tugged at the corners of Kale's mouth. "You want me to do the thing?" Ivar nodded. "It's time." Kale didn't waste any time. He tapped a few buttons, activating the ship's last line of defense, a series of electromagnetic pulses designed to cripple Imperial sensors. The Nemesis surged forward, sending the pulses into space like ripples from a stone thrown into water. The Imperial ship floundered as its sensors overloaded, scrambling to regain control. "We've lost them," Kyle said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. Ivar exhaled slowly, watching the data on the screen as the Imperial ship's signal flickered and died. They were safe for now, but the danger hadn't passed. The game had only just begun. The Nemesis had struck again, and the Empire would pay the price. They were getting too close to the truth. The Nemesis would need to disappear again, this time for longer. But the captain knew one thing for sure. The Empire would never be the same. Their eyes were open now, but it was already too late. The rebellion had taken root. The darkness had a new master. The Nemesis sailed silently, its hull cutting through the endless black with a singular purpose. After the successful strike on the relay station, the crew felt the adrenaline begin to wane, replaced by the quiet anticipation of their next move. Captain Ivar Nix stood still at the edge of the command deck, his sharp eyes scanning the shifting laser plasma displays. Each readout an intricate puzzle piece that, when aligned, would bring the Empire to its knees. "How long until we're in position?" Ivar asked, his voice low, calm, as though the silence that hung in the air before the storm didn't affect him. Jarek Thorne's voice rang out from the navigation station, steady despite the impending uncertainty. "We're nearly there, Captain. Once we enter the outer ring of the command center, we'll be in their blind spot for exactly 3 minutes, long enough to breach the core systems before their fleet even knows what hit them." Ivar nodded, the plan forming clearly in his mind. It was risky. If the Nemesis was detected even a second too early, their strike would be in vain. But there was no room for hesitation. The Nemesis was all they had, and they would make this count. He moved across the deck, stopping in front of Cale Grayson, the ship's tactical officer. "Cale, I need you to coordinate the distraction. As soon as we breach, I want their forces split. We need to send them chasing shadows, to force them to commit their reserves, or we risk being overwhelmed." Cale glanced up from his console, his expression focused but eager, as if the challenge was what kept him sharp. "I'll use their own protocols against them, Captain. They're counting on their comm systems being stable. A few false signals and they'll tear themselves apart trying to respond to attacks that aren't there." Ivar turned to Dax Rylus next, his tech specialist, whose calm demeanor always contrasted with the speed at which he worked. "Dax, you're our eyes in the dark. Once we breach the core, we need you to override every lock and bypass every firewall. There's no room for error." Dax nodded without hesitation, fingers already typing out commands on his display. "I'll make sure every back door is wide open for us. Once we're in, they won't even have time to react." Ivar stood back for a moment, letting the crew settle into their roles. They were more than a crew. They were a unit, each member indispensable to the success of this mission. The plan was laid out before them, each movement calculated to ensure the Empire would fall apart in the chaos of their own arrogance. The Nemesis began its descent into the heart of the Imperial Command Center. Through the heads-up display, the crew could see the vast, sprawling complex, the nerve center of the Empire, where decisions were made, where the galaxy's might was directed. But Ivar knew that it was nothing but a fortress built on the assumption that no one would dare challenge them. "Steady," Ivar muttered under his breath as the ship approached. Every fiber of his being was honed in on the operation. His mind raced with every possibility, every outcome. This wasn't just a strike on a system, it was a message. They would strike where the Empire believed it was invulnerable, and with any luck the galaxy would witness the cracks begin to appear. The laser plasma displays blinked with urgency as the Nemesis entered the final stage of the approach. The command center loomed ahead, its defenses layered in deep red on the heads-up display. But it wasn't enough. The Empire's vast network of sensors couldn't detect the Nemesis until they were right on top of it. And by then, it would be too late. "Now," Ivar commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. Kyle hit a few keys on his console, triggering the first phase of the plan. The Nemesis's stealth systems deactivated for a fraction of a second, just enough to plant a false signal into the Empire's vast communication grid. Imperial ships in distant sectors began to shift, their focus diverted by the sudden appearance of what they believed to be a rebel fleet. Dax's fingers flew across his station as he manipulated the core systems, bypassing Imperial firewalls and plunging the Nemesis into the heart of the Empire's military apparatus. "We're in," he said, his voice steady but tinged with satisfaction. "Kyle, keep the signal moving. Make them chase the Phantom Fleet," Ivar ordered. "Reese, take us closer to the core." The ship lurched forward as Reese Maverick expertly navigated the Nemesis through the narrowing corridors of the command center. Ivar felt the slight vibrations under his boots, the faint tremor of the ship's engines as they powered through the final stretch. But the sound was drowned out by the pounding of his own pulse, every second stretching like an eternity. "We're almost there," Jarek said, his voice tight with anticipation. "Shifting course now. We'll be in the blind spot in 3, 2, 1. The ship tilted slightly as the crew's coordinated efforts brought the Nemesis into position. The vast Imperial Command Center lay before them like a giant, indifferent monolith, unaware of the storm that was about to tear through it. Outside, the cold, sterile light of the Empire's artificial systems reflected off the hull of the Nemesis, casting long shadows in the ship's command deck. "Disrupt their shields now," Ivar said, his voice firm. Kale's fingers never stopped moving, even as he activated the next phase of the plan. The ship's pulse cannons fired with silent precision, sending waves of electromagnetic pulses that shook the surrounding Imperial ships into confusion. It wasn't enough to destroy them. It was enough to break their cohesion. It would sow doubt, make them question what was happening. And in that chaos, the Nemesis would strike. The room shook slightly as the Nemesis's cloaking systems switched back on, vanishing once more into the void. The crew worked like clockwork, every member moving in synchronized rhythm. But Ivar knew the hardest part was yet to come. The Empire had no idea how deep they had infiltrated. "Targeting the central command grid," Dax said. 5 seconds until we breach." "Do it," Ivar ordered, his eyes never leaving the readouts. A split second later, the Nemesis cracked through the central command center's final defenses, sending shockwaves through the entire system. The ship's weaponry, fine-tuned for maximum efficiency, disabled the core systems of the Empire's entire fleet network. Within moments, the Imperial fleet was left blind. No coordination, no backup, just scattered remnants of a once proud force. The Nemesis had delivered the blow that would start the Empire's collapse. "All systems are down," Dax confirmed, his voice low with disbelief. "They're cut off." Ivar exhaled slowly, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. "This is only the beginning. We have to move quickly. The longer we stay here, the more likely they are to regroup." As the Nemesis glided out of the Empire's command center, Ivar allowed himself a moment to reflect. They had done it. The Empire's power structure had fractured, but there was more to do, so much more. This victory was only the first step. The galaxy had begun to awaken, and the Nemesis had given it hope. Now they would have to face the consequences of their actions. The Empire wasn't finished yet, and neither were they. The Nemesis moved with quiet determination, its silhouette barely visible against the endless black. The crew, once tense with the uncertainty of their mission, now felt a quiet but powerful satisfaction settle into their bones. They had struck the heart of the Empire, and now the ripple effect was spreading. Captain Ivar Nix stood still at the edge of the command deck, his gaze distant. His crew had done the impossible. They had broken the Empire. But Ivar knew the war was far from over. The rebellion had only begun. The Nemesis had delivered the first blow, but it was up to them to ensure it wasn't the last. "We did it, Captain," Lieutenant Jarek Thorne said, his voice quieter than usual, as though still processing the enormity of what had just transpired. "The fleet's in disarray. They're running scared." Ivar didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched as the laser plasma displays flickered with real-time information. The Imperial fleet was splintered, their command system crippled, and the signal from their forces was weak. The structure that had held the Empire together for so long was crumbling. "Scared or not," Ivar finally said, his voice steady, "they're still dangerous. They'll regroup. They'll adapt. We need to strike while we still have the advantage." His words hung in the air, heavy with the reality of what they faced. The fall of the Empire was not a moment of triumph, but a beginning of something bigger than any single strike. They had taken down the giant, but its shadows stretched far, and those shadows would fight back with everything they had. Dax Rylos, the tech specialist, was already scanning incoming data from rebel cells, piecing together the intelligence that would help them decide their next move. "The Empire is scrambling, Captain, but their hold on the core worlds is still firm. They'll be expecting a larger rebellion, but they won't see us coming." Ivar nodded. The Nemesis had shown them one undeniable truth. The Empire could be defeated, not by overwhelming force, but by tactics, by striking where they were weakest, by showing them that they weren't invincible. "Kyle," Ivar turned to his tactical officer, who had been quietly studying the readouts, "I want you to continue feeding them false signals. Keep them guessing. Keep them afraid." Kel Grayson's lips curled into a sharp grin, the kind that promised trouble. "They won't know what hit them, Captain. We'll make them wonder if the whole galaxy's against them." Ivar allowed himself a small smile. There was something satisfying about using the Empire's own paranoia against them. The Empire had always been so sure of their power, so confident in their dominance. And now they were starting to realize just how fragile their empire really was. "Good," Ivar said. "Dax, take the lead on sabotaging their remaining comm channels. We need to make sure their internal divisions get worse before they have time to regroup." Dax's fingers hovered over the console. "Already on it. We've made sure they're isolated. If we keep up the pressure, they'll collapse under the weight of their own bureaucracy." The crew worked in silent synchronicity, their hands moving across consoles with practiced ease. The Nemesis wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol, a weapon of rebellion and freedom, carved out of nothing but human ingenuity and will. The Empire had underestimated humanity. They had thought their size, their resources, their weapons would keep them safe. But Ivar had shown them something they hadn't accounted for, their greatest weakness. And now, that weakness was spreading like wildfire in the dry underbrush. "Captain!" Reese Maverick's voice interrupted the steady rhythm of the crew's work. His face was a mask of concentration. "We've reached the coordinates. The Empire's last stronghold is ahead. Ivar turned, his eyes narrowing. This was it. The final push. The Nemesis was ready, but so were the remnants of the Empire's power. The core worlds were fortified. He knew they were heading straight into the heart of the Empire's remaining strength, and he had no illusions about the risks. "We take it, or they take us," Ivar said, his voice calm but with a certain finality to it. "This ends now, but it's not just about destroying them. It's about sending a message to every corner of the galaxy." The Nemesis maneuvered into position, the heads-up display showing the remnants of the Empire's defenses, desperate but still formidable. The final task wasn't to defeat them in battle, it was to expose the lie. The lie that the Empire had built itself on, the lie that it was invincible, the lie that no one could stand against it. "On my mark," Ivar said, locking eyes with each of his crew members in turn. "We'll do this together. For every world they've conquered, for every person they've oppressed. Today, the Empire will fall." The Nemesis closed in on the heart of the Empire, their final command center looming large ahead. The walls of the station were imposing, lined with defensive systems and powerful turrets. But it didn't matter. The Nemesis had come too far, and the crew had been through too much. There was no turning back now. Ivar stood firm as the Nemesis surged forward, the command center looming closer with each passing second. "All hands, brace for impact." The ship's pulse cannons roared to life, striking the station's defenses with devastating force. But it wasn't just the weapons that were tearing through the Empire's defenses. It was the simple fact that the Nemesis had made them believe in their own fear. They had made the mighty fall to the clever, to the unseen. As the Nemesis tore through the heart of the Empire's command center, the crew could feel it, the weight of history shifting. They were making history, but they were also rewriting it. The Empire had underestimated them. Now they would show the galaxy what humanity could do when it was pushed too far. "Captain," Kyle's voice rang out sharp and steady, "the core systems are down. The Empire's last line of defense is shattered." Ivar stood motionless for a moment, watching as the vast machine that had dominated the galaxy for so long crumbled under the weight of their rebellion. He felt no elation, just a cold, grim satisfaction. They had done it. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to be free, to be powerful in ways the Empire had never imagined. "Let's make sure they never forget who took them down," Ivar muttered. He turned to the crew, his gaze steady, unwavering. "The Nemesis has shown them fear. Now, we'll show them something greater." Hope the Nemesis faded into the darkness once more, leaving behind the shattered remnants of the Empire. Its crew, the unlikeliest of heroes, had proved that even the mightiest empire could be erased by a single ship and a single crew who refused to bow. Humanity's ghost had struck, and now no tyrant would ever believe they were untouchable again.